Hello and welcome back to Bits and Bobs. Today's video is a video we're calling Monarchs on Location.
We'll be visiting locations all around the UK that are important to a certain monarch and bringing a coin from that monarch's reign to the location, so linking the location with so much history to the coins from our collection, really sort of focusing on the history behind these old coins. We start here at Guilford Castle, built in around the year 1100, so 900 years of history here. As we can see, if we look around, it used to be a much grander place. In fact, here is a model of how the castle used to have looked. So we can see there the keep onto the left of the screen, which we see today. But there would have been many more elements to the castle, including the houses and the walls surrounding the area. Would have been a grand place indeed in medieval times. Now, this castle was extended in the 1170s by King Henry II. We can see the grounds stretch very far over the surrounding area, with parts of the old castle down there and all the way off over there as part of the extensions of King Henry II, our first monarch. But as well as being extended by King Henry II, the tower here at Guilford Castle and the other spaces would have been used to house different medieval kings and their courts and their entourage whom they travelled with. So these walls here will have seen many different kings over the medieval period come here to stay for how long they were staying in the nearby area, and of course this is a place fit for a king to stay. But as well as for military use, of course, the king would have hosted great receptions and parties within these halls 900 years ago. Would have been much more colourful, of course not a ruin back then, and great medieval gatherings would have taken place. So as with many medieval castles, it would have served two purposes. Of course, a very defensible area with a big high stone keep and great views over the land around, so having the high ground in the area for military and defence purposes, but also inside would have been grand and luxurious to host a king of England at the time. The reason the castle was extended was because of the 1173 to 1174 revolt, a revolt against King Henry II led by his three sons and his wife, who betrayed him and rebelled against him, and for there's about 18-month period they were fighting, but eventually it ended in failure for the rebellion, and his sons did apologise and reconcile with King Henry II, so luckily all was well. So up there we have Guilford Castle, we've just explored, and the history behind it. And here we have a halfpenny from the reign of King Henry II, when coins that were halfpennies were physically cut in half from pennies. But turning it round and looking on the obverse, we can see the portrait of King Henry II, the coin there on the right to compare to, but we can see just one of the eyes, the nose and the mouth and sort of the beard, and the hand with the scepter remaining on this coin. After almost 900 years of history, King Henry II reigned from 1154 to 1189, and his coins, of course, have been used in these grounds when he stayed here, and of course when he was fortifying it for the revolt of 1173 to 1174. So there we go, there is our first coin, a Henry II halfpenny at our first location, Guilford Castle, and now on to the next. So looking now to our coin timeline, as you've seen, we've begun with King Henry II, after whom is King Richard I. However, we don't have a coin of Richard I, so on now to King John.
In 1215, King John signed the Magna Carta, and of the three that are left, we have one in Salisbury Cathedral. That's why I'm here with a King John halfpenny with the Magna Carta. And this one here dates from the early 12th century, roughly the same time as the Magna Carta and King John.
From cathedral to castle, our next stop for King John is Farnham Castle. Next we come here to Farnham Castle. Now once this was a glorious castle, one of the largest in the area, standing very proud and hosting multiple monarchs and kings and queens of England. It was first built in 1136 AD, and then in the early 1200s, I believe the first monarch, as Henry II ordered some of it to be destroyed, but the first monarch to actually stay here was King John. Now, when King John stayed here in the early 1200s, he would of course been a very important person, the most important person in the kingdom, and so would have had medieval guards stationed here at these arrow slits, of course with their bow and arrows, looking out for any enemies of the kingdom and of His Majesty King John. They would have been paid with coins such as this. This is a King John penny, and was roughly the medieval wage per day. So a medieval soldier, we sat up here, guarding out for King John, and receive one of these lovely sterling silver pennies for his efforts. From cathedral to castle to abbey, our next stop for King John is Romsey Abbey, as we can see here. Now, one of King John's favourite pastimes was hunting in the New Forest, and he visited this town where we are now, of Romsey, many times, in 1200, 1206, and some later as well. He visited Romsey Abbey, where we are now, many times as well. And centuries later, to this day, the grand building, the Romsey Abbey, is still open to the public for free entry and in the centre of the Romsey High Street and town centre. Now, inside the abbey, I have brought this King John penny. You can see a great portrait there of King John, a portrait of a man who was here in person himself over 800 years ago, and the coin is now back here in this grand old abbey building. You can see here a great building and a great coin with very close ties, as the coin features King John, and King John was here. He liked the abbey so much that in fact his daughter was educated here in the abbey in the early 1200s. Now, when he stayed here in Romsey, hunting and visiting the abbey, where did he stay? Well, he actually had a house here in Romsey. Let's go over there. Right then, so King John's house should just be this way, as we can see here on the sign, King John's house just down here. Right then, we're almost here to this very historic site. We can see here an older depiction of King John's house, and it is the oldest building surviving on this site, King John's house. And looking behind me, here we can see the house. Now, as you've seen, I've brought this King John penny into the abbey, and we are now here at King John's house, where he stayed in the early 1200s whilst hunting in the nearby forests and woodlands. So there's some great history here in Romsey linking to King John, and our final destination on our coin tour of history for King John is down in Rochester. So let's go. I'm here now at the historic Rochester Castle, almost 1,000 years old, built in 1087 AD. And due to the proximity with the castle and London and the Thames, a very important location in medieval England. Now then, in 1215, after King John signed or stamped the Magna Carta, the castle here was taken over and overrun by rebels against King John. However, King John's forces reclaimed Rochester Castle in 1215 by besieging it. Now, besieging it led to heavy damage, as we can still see with the castle today, not in perfect condition, although it is 1,000 years old. Now, the year after King John passed away, he died in 1216, and the throne was passed to King Henry III, who commissioned extensive rebuilding, repairs and additions to Rochester Castle, the most notable of which is the round tower we see here. Now, King Henry III added the iconic round tower as not an addition but a replacement. We can see here an illustration as during this siege of 1215, one of the 4 towers was destroyed and it crumbled down. It was replaced with a round tower, as the round tower is stronger than the other 3, which are still from back in the day, 1,000 years old, these square towers. But the other side features the now iconic round tower of Henry III, of whom, of course, with this series, I have a coin here with me today at Rochester. This is a halfpenny, again, like I say, in a time when halfpennies were actually half of pennies. We can see the long cross design there to the reverse, and then to the other side is the portrait of the King Henry III, who ordered the rebuilding and the construction of this tower, building it into that iconic and famous round tower on one of the sides of Rochester Castle's impressive keep that has lasted a millennia. And there we go one more time, the impressive 800-year-old round tower of Henry III. For that lifetime, that reign began on the site we are at now, which is Winchester Castle. Now, when Winchester was the great capital of England, a castle stood here on this spot about 800 years ago, as we can see. Now, not much of the original castle remains. We can see here just ruins of the older medieval part. Of course, the Great Hall does still stand, heavily modified over the years, mainly Victorian in style, as it was, well, similarly to this, heavily damaged, but still is standing here as the Great Hall. And of course, here was the birthplace of King Henry III. From birthplace to battlefield, we are here at the town of Hay-on-Wye, on the English and Welsh border in the Welsh marshes. And this battle took place here at Hay Castle, built in the mid-1100s, around 1150 to 1160, a 900-year-old castle here, and 800 years ago, a very key location in a battle involving Henry III. Over 900 years, the castle has been many things and been extended many times. We have the original part here, which is the Norman castle from, like I say, around 1140, 1150. We then have the Jacobean mansion here, which is from the 1600s, the sort of the grandest part as it's less damaged than the original castle here. And then to the end there, extended is a Victorian, early Victorian stable and coach house for horses. So it's been extended over many, many hundreds of years. And the oldest part there is the Norman part, dating from not long after the Normans. Now we can see here, although heavily damaged, how important the castle would have been from this high vantage point overlooking the town and where the attackers would have come from. And we can see just down here, in part of the ruins, this round object on a stand. But what is this? Inside the Norman keep here we can see 900 years of history in the architecture and the stonework, but more importantly for now, we can see up here, as I pointed to, this here. Now what is this? This is actually a trebuchet ball, so it had been fired from a big wooden trebuchet at the castle in about the 1260s, around 1264, during the Second Barons' War, where the barons, led by Simon de Montfort, rebelled against King Henry III. And of course, during the rebellion, there would have been fights and battles and attacks on castles and strongholds. Proper medieval warfare. We can see, arrow slits in the castles where the attackers and defenders would have been either defending or attacking the castle, depending on their loyalty or disloyalty to King Henry III. But there we go, some real medieval history, a medieval trebuchet ball fired at this castle almost 800 years ago. Here's how the attack may have looked. We can see there the arches on the crenellations, the trebuchet balls flying through the air, as we have one just up there that has been found. And then the, of course, ground fight going on below in the courtyard and in the surrounding grounds. Of course, the fight being fought over loyalty to this man right here, who is King Henry III. And similar to the coins, it is very cool to be able to touch and actually feel and touch the part of the history here in the castle, and more specifically the actual object here of this trebuchet ball. Right then, so that's Henry III. Of course, after the Second Barons' War was unsuccessful, in the 1260s he reigned happily until 1272, and his passing, and he was succeeded by his son, his eldest son, King Edward I, taking the throne in 1272, so now on to King Edward I. Now, as we can see here, I have a coin from the reign of King Edward I. Now, you can see here, this is from between 1272 to 1307, and it's a long cross design. To the obverse here, we can see a very clear portrait of the king, King Edward I, most famous for conquering Wales. And I'm currently in Wales. This coin would have been very likely been brought over from London, where it was struck and brought here to Wales to be used by the population that Edward had just conquered, as he integrated Wales into England, integrating the new kingdom that he has conquered into his land. So after 800 years, this Edward I penny, bearing the portrait of the conqueror of Wales, is back here in Wales. Here is a castle in Wales. Edward I commissioned and built many, many castles in Wales to protect his land from the natives that wanted it, of course, it wanted it back then. But now, after 800 years of history, Wales is, happily coexisting with England. So there we go, Edward I coin here in Wales as he conquered all those centuries ago. Very cool history and a lovely location indeed. And now on to his son, King Edward II. This coin here is a penny of the reign of King Edward II, who was crowned here at his coronation in 1308, this here being Westminster Abbey. This will be a bit of a cheat for all the monarchs here, because pretty much every single monarch was crowned here, had the coronation here, and many of them, up to George III, are buried here. But we'll only do one monarch here today, that being King Edward II. Now his father, King Edward I, of course, conquered Scotland and stole the Stone of Destiny, and had specially built a coronation chair that is still used today, 700 years later. And for all the monarchs previous, they've been using the coronation throne that is in their Westminster Abbey and the Stone of Destiny for their coronations. But the first monarch to use these was King Edward II, who features here on this penny from the 1300s. Now I did also bring this Edward II farthing, it's another lovely Edward II coin, to Cardiff Castle, once again, of course, in Wales, as King Edward II, the man there on this farthing. We can see a lovely portrait. He was actually born in Wales during one of his father's campaigns. Like I say, Edward I did conquer Wales, and while he was out here in Wales conquering, he had his firstborn son, Edward II, who would later become king. We come now to Cornwall. Now, Cornwall was part of England, added to England in the reign of King Athelstan, the grandson of King Alfred the Great. This was in the mid-900s. Now, about 400 years later, in the 1300s, in the reign of King Edward III, of whom I have a coin here, this is a penny of Edward III, Cornwall was created as the Duchy of Cornwall, which still exists today, in the year 1337. Now, of course, the monarch, the king, could raise wealth and gain his wealth through taxes of the people. He could raise taxes for war and taxes for his expenses, but his son, the heir to the throne, or the Prince of Wales, needed a way to get income, not relying on his father and the king so much. And so therefore the Duchy of Cornwall was created in 1337, a massive expanse of land here in Cornwall that was owned by whoever was the Prince of Wales. It would be inherited by every heir to the throne, and they could use this land to gain wealth and gain money. Very fitting that this is a financial bit of history, as of course I have here a bit of finances from the 1300s in the form of a lovely Edward III penny. Returning now to the coin timeline, after Edward III there would be Richard II, but here we have an apology to make, as we have a massive gap now. Richard II, Henry IV, Henry V, Henry VI, Edward IV, Edward V, Richard III, Henry VII, and continuing down to the next row with Henry VIII, Edward VI, and as an excuse, Lady Jane Grey didn't have any coins. But all of these monarchs are missed. We do not have the coins or the locations, so we now come to Mary I to continue. Now our next location is somewhere absolutely amazing and magnificent. 1,000 years of history and amazing architecture. Can you guess where we are? Let's turn around. That's right. This grand cathedral is Winchester Cathedral, built around 1,000 years ago, and is actually the longest cathedral in the United Kingdom. An amazing building, absolutely brilliant. I'll get you some shots of that in a minute. But we are here today because of not a king, we're now on to our first queen, the first queen of England, Queen Mary I, who reigned from 1553 to 1558, but was here in 1554 in the summer of that year for her marriage, as she married here to her husband, Prince Philip, later Prince Philip II or King Philip II of Spain. But they were married here at Winchester, in Winchester Cathedral. And so here we have it, a coin from the reign of Mary I. You can see her portrait there, facing to the left and crowned, and mention of her husband there on the coin, Philip. Of course, very important today as we're here where they wed. Now, there was also a shilling made. I do not have one of those. We don't have one of those in the Bits and Bobs collection. With a double portrait, the first ever double portrait coin, which featured a portrait of Mary and Philip together on that coin. So, of course, united in coinage and in holy matrimony, here for the holy matrimony, and of course in London at the Royal Mint, where these lovely coins were made 500 years ago. But there we go, Mary I, Bloody Mary, Queen Mary of England, at her place of wedding, Winchester Cathedral. Now, returning to Farnham Castle, like I say, it was built in 1138 AD, but even during the 1500s in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, of who I have a 3p right here, but she actually stayed here at least 6 times, so not just once or twice, but actually at least 6 times. So it's a very important location in the Tudor times, as the Queen stayed here many a time. And like I've mentioned throughout the video, it's just so amazing to think that these stones here and this grand building, when it once was back in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I in the grand Tudor period, when England was sort of asserting itself as the military power of Europe into the 17th, 18th centuries. And I have here a little 3p piece of Queen Elizabeth I, and it's just a lovely coin, and it's just cool to think that the portrait of the Queen on this coin, you know, that's just a portrait of the Queen, but the real Queen herself, Elizabeth I of England, almost 45 years on the throne, stayed here where we are today, almost over 400 years later, stayed here at least 6 times. There's some great history. Now, perhaps it is cheating to use the same location twice, but I'm going to do it again because we're now back here at Winchester Castle. Now, as you remember, the majority of Winchester Castle is reduced to ruins, the main surviving parts here being the sort of underground passages that would have been underneath the huge towers and walls of the main castle. Here is a sort of depiction of how it would have looked in around 1222 and after then. So a massive, massive castle there with the walls, turrets, and the great hall. So we are sort of around here with these sort of under foundations being what we see today for the towers, and the great hall here being the only surviving part of this once great castle. Now, Queen Elizabeth I visited Winchester in 1591, and while visiting and staying in the city, she stayed here at the Great Hall as part of Winchester Castle. And so here is the coin for the location, like I say, an Elizabeth I coin, this time a 2p of her reign, here at Winchester Castle, specifically the Great Hall, and she stayed here in 1591, almost 500 years ago. So there we are, some lovely history and a lovely coin as well. After Elizabeth I is James I, but we don't have a coin of James I, so we'll now move on to King Charles I for our next monarch. Now then, we come down to the southern coast of England, and we come to this magnificent coastal defence, Hurst Castle, sophisticated fortress built by Henry VIII. So Henry VIII, maritime castle here, defending the waters. I'm here now at Hurst Castle, built in 1544 by King Henry VIII, and used to defend the Solent and the British Isles, the shoreline, 500 years. But it did have another purpose in the 1600s, about 400 years ago. It was actually here that King Charles I was held before being taken to London to be executed at Whitehall. So King Charles I was here 400 years ago, being held in this mighty castle. And I have here, of course, as per the video, a King Charles I coin. This is a 6p of his reign, and would have been about a day's wage for the common man at the time, but of course not very much longer would it have featured the king, and his portrait there, as that head was to be chopped off not long after he was held here at Hurst Castle. So here we have a close-up of the coin there. We can see, not a great portrait, this is quite a worn coin, but definitely can be seen a silhouette of King Charles I, and he would of course been here in person 400 years ago, being held at the orders of Parliament, of course soon to be executed. Now the king was held at Hurst for nearly 3 weeks in this building, and then on the 19th of December the king was taken from Hurst to London, culminating in his execution in January of 1649. We have here a bit of art from the time of these Parliament supporters showing the king in captivity here at Hurst Castle, which, although is primarily a defensive fortification for the Solent, has also served as a prison for some very important prisoners over the years.
On 28th of September 1625, King Charles I arrived in Salisbury and met with the council. It was decided by them to increase the local tax. Back then, locals would have paid taxes with coins such as this. And as you can see, these coins featured His Majesty's portrait here on the side of the coin. Charles I would return to Salisbury 19 years later in 1644 with his army, victorious from battles in the West Country. During the Civil War, King Charles held Salisbury and the nearby Guilford Castle. King Charles would have paid his soldiers with his coins, as we can see here. This is a 6p and would represent the daily wage of a regular soldier. This coin may have been here 400 years ago, with King Charles paying his troops, and today I've brought it back to Salisbury. We also brought a lovely Charles I shilling to the National Gallery, where his official portrait is kept. So, I'm here at MSB House, where Charles II used to live. And here we have a Charles II coin, where Charles II used to live, just behind me.
We return to Rochester. Now here in Rochester we can see what is known as Restoration House, a lovely grand building built in 1587. Now if we come down here we can see there's a sign is right here, and it says Restoration House, built in 1587, and it is said that Charles II stayed here on the night of the 28th of May in 1660 at his restoration, so the day before he then went to London to become king. So I have here, we can see, a coin from the reign of Charles II, and that reign started the day after he, right here on the coin, stayed at the house we are at right now. So some great history. He was in this house, woke up that morning, and became king the same day. Very, very cool. And then from 1668, I have here a shilling from his reign. We can see his portrait there of Charles II to the obverse of the coin. So great history encapsulated not only in this lovely silver shilling, but also in the location of Restoration House.